So far in Mind Blend, we have tapped into topics that have a lot to do with our mind, our intention, our desire, and our fear. Not all of these are rational things, and it turns out that our brain has a secret to why we do things a certain way and why we feel a certain way. So if you're curious about how your brain really works, and more importantly, how to outsmart it, this one's for you. Let's get into it with my guest, Loretta Breuning. Welcome to the show, Mind Blend. I'm your host, Karen Chong, and I'll be diving into the minds of incredible people, each an expert in their very own way. Together, we'll uncover insights and share ideas so you can be inspired and empowered to navigate your own unique journey in life. Ready to get curious and discover what's possible? Let's blend. So, a few episodes ago, I invited a guest who's sort of a social scientist, Mohammed Atik, and we talked about how our brain works in relation to our media landscape now in 2025. Today, I'd like to dive into more of the science part of our brain, and I have Loretta Breuning with me. Hi, Loretta.
Hi, nice to be here.
Welcome to Mindblend. So Loretta is the founder of Inner Mammal Institute, and we'll dive into it a little bit more in the later part of the episode, and the author of a few books about happy brain. So Loretta, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to studying the brain?
Sure. If I may, if I just say the subtitle of my main book, because that explains everything, it's Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. I was a professor of international management, and I had grown up with a lot of drama, let's say, around me. And I was always a fan of academic psychology once I discovered it because it gave me an explanation and it gave me hope. But then over time, raising children and having thousands of students, I started to feel like academic psychology did not really explain the world and did not fix. Basically, the idea is it's supposed to make everybody happy if you just follow the book of social science, but it did not. So that's how I started doing my own research and discovered the many references to the animal brain in all of psychology research. And nobody connects the dots. And because psychology was not my primary field, I was able to connect the dots in ways that are not done, let's say, in the therapy world. And to put it in one sentence, animals are not nice to each other. Animals are not happy all the time. So this whole warm and fuzzy view that we have that that's supposed to be our natural default state, it's just not true at all. So,
Mm, how did you connect the dots? And what I mean is, what did you discover that most of us didn't even realize?
so for each of those chemicals I mentioned, which I call the happy chemicals, I learned that in nature, in all mammals, they turn on for reasons that are mm, very related to a survival action that the animal needs to take. And we
Mm,
only get a little drip of it when the situation is appropriate to taking that survival action. So, what that means is our happy chemicals are not meant to be on all the time. And they're not turned on by these warm and fuzzy peace and love kind of motivations that we're pressured to embrace with our verbal brain. But our mammal brain, in the interest of time, to say is quite selfish and it's focused on its own survival needs. And lo and behold, it feels good when it meets its survival needs. And it's so easy to see that that's how humans function. And yet we're not supposed to acknowledge it. And the missing link here is that we have two separate brains. We have a verbal brain that's unique to humans and a mammalian limbic system, which is effectively the same in all mammals. And the mammal brain is what controls the chemicals that make you feel good and bad, and is what controls your body. So the verbal talking brain has much less of a role in all of this than people like to think.
Ah, so I'm starting to understand why you didn't think psychology solved the problem because all these chemicals are released by your mammal brain, and the verbal brain is trying to explain based on the situation, or maybe try to draw links to whatever happened around you.
And the verbal brain looks for a way to make you look good and feel good
Yeah,
and to
yeah.
put a good face on it. So the way I say it is we think it's rational, but it's really just rationalizing.
Ah, yes, yes. I definitely agree with that. I can see where you're coming from. So I know most of us probably have heard of dopamine. Like, I feel like that's the one that gets mentioned a lot nowadays. Can we go into a little bit about each one of these happy chemicals? And so we can understand what their roles are and when they get released?
Sure. So we hear about dopamine mostly in a negative context in today's world. Either they're telling you that it's you have too much dopamine, or they're telling you that some evil corporation is controlling your dopamine.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't agree with either of these. So the bottom line, if you imagine an elephant is thirsty in a desert and it sees an oasis in the distance.
Hmm.
And dopamine turns on when you see a cue linked to meeting a survival need. So
Hmm.
imagine our Stone Age ancestors and they see an oasis in the distance. So the first response is, I'm happy, I'm thrilled because I see a way to meet my survival needs. That releases energy that motivates me to move toward the reward related cue. And then I get more and more dopamine as I see that I'm getting closer.
Mm.
So if you set a goal that's unrealistic and you don't see yourself getting closer, then you don't spark your dopamine.
Oh.
But the other complicated thing is dopamine pathways are paved by past experience.
Hmm.
So the elephant finds water with neural pathways from finding water in the past. Because when you
Mm.
finally find water, you're so happy that
Yeah.
all the neurons active in that moment connect. And
Hmm.
this is why people have bad habits, because at some moment in your past, you enjoyed this, let's say, substance
Hmm.
um, while you were having a bad day, and your neurons connected. And now, the next time you have a bad day, you're wired to seek reward in that
Hmm.
particular way. And it's different for everybody.
Hmm. Yeah, it's dangerous. I'm sure we all know all the bad habits that we have. So I hear also dopamine being mentioned when it comes to, say, social media. And can you explain from your perspective how you think social media is leveraging how dopamines get released and how it negatively affects us? How it
Sure.
positively and negatively affects us?
Sure, sure. First, just for some historical context, when I was young, there was a bumper sticker called that said "Kill your television," because there was this observation that some people just sat in front of the television all the time. So, in every time period,
Mm-hmm.
there's a bad habit
Yes.
that maybe is distracting, and distraction, we could talk about that later. There's some positive value of distraction, but also negative. And it could be anything. So in every time period, it's something. But then every generation likes to think, oh, life is harder than ever. And today the media is trying to lure you, and politicians are trying to lure you by saying, your life is so hard. Life is harder than it ever was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so people are saying, well, yeah, television was bad, but social media is so worse. So the bottom line is, you know what? I didn't explain serotonin yet. So that I think will help people understand a lot. So dopamine is like getting food and water and firewood, meeting those initial needs.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the modern world, those needs are met so easily that they don't spark that much dopamine the way they did for our ancestors. So we get our dopamine more by meeting social needs, but
Uh-huh.
other chemicals are involved in social needs, serotonin and oxytocin. And there are two very different social needs. So from an animal perspective, let's say I want to be in a herd because that protects me from predators. But
Yeah.
once I'm in a herd, well, that's better than being alone on the prairie. But then I see that I'm at the bottom of the herd, and I don't like that at all. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to rise in the herd. And
Uh-huh.
you asked me about how I got involved in this. When I read that, I couldn't believe it. I said,
Mm-hmm.
how have I studied psychology for 40 years and nobody told me that the animal brain is constantly striving to raise its status?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how every mammal group works.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the one hand, there's no guaranteed way to raise your status. And on the other hand, you're considered a bad person if you admit that you care about raising your status. So, social media is sort of like today's answer that offers some
Oh,
controllability in
yeah.
trying to meet those recognition and social
Mm-hmm.
dominance needs, and
Mm-hmm.
also in a way that, is maybe it's considered um, crass, but it's much better than like in the past, people would pull out their swords and have sword fights. So
Yeah.
social media is better than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that sort of helps me understand why people don't like FOMO because it relates to if you're not doing everything that these people are doing, you're one below them. And I also want to touch on, so we talked about oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and I think there's one more happy chemical,
Endorphin.
endorphin. Yes.
Yes. But first, you raised a really important point about when a person thinks they're in the one down position,
Hmm.
that releases threat chemicals, cortisol. And
Okay.
cortisol makes you feel like your survival is threatened. And
Mm,
in the state of nature, there were so many real survival threats that you didn't release it because you weren't invited to a party or you weren't invited to a meeting. But in the modern world, you have all of this emergency alert system, but you don't have another real emergency today. So, not getting invited to that party or that meeting triggers it. And that's why the one down position is a life or threat thing, a
hmm.
life or death threat. And to even make it worse, let's say that yesterday I got 10 likes and today I only get 9 likes.
Yeah.
That can be a one down position. And you didn't even do it to me. I sort of did
Hmm.
it to myself.
By
And
checking how many likes you have.
yes, and by
Uh-huh.
the expectation. And that's because the brain continually habituates to whatever it has, and you only get dopamine when you get more. And that's considered so crass that nobody wants to admit, I care about getting more. So everyone blames society for that and can't acknowledge it in their own brain.
Hmm. So is cortisol released when only you feel the one down? Or what other times does cortisol get released?
Good question. Cortisol is nature's emergency alarm.
Hmm.
So the core function is pain. So if you twist my arm, or if I get my arm stuck in something,
Hmm.
cortisol lets me know, oh, I've gone too far. I better stop or
Hmm.
I'm going to hurt myself. So
Uh-huh.
that's its main job. But there's a predictive function in all
Hmm.
of these chemicals, which means if I got hurt the last time I did that, then the
Hmm.
next time I see that thing, my cortisol is going to turn on in advance
Uh-huh.
because neurons connected and the cortisol is like paving on those neural pathways.
Uh-huh.
So that's how, if I climb a mountain because I think there's water on the other side, but then there's no water on the other side, I'm not going to climb that mountain the next time.
Hmm.
So that's a healthy function. But once again, if you have a quite a safe, sheltered life,
Hmm.
then you anything that's an obstacle in your path is cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
So if I think I'm going to be the biggest genius ever in XYZ field,
Yeah.
when I think that, my dopamine is triggered. But then
Mm-hmm.
as soon as I see an obstacle, then I think, oh, maybe I'm not moving toward it. So then
Uh-huh.
my dopamine stops and my cortisol starts.
Uh-huh. So the example that you gave, climbing a mountain, that I'm wondering if this is why we don't want to be in situations where we have not gone in before, or how we are not comfortable with uncertainty because there's no reward connected already.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So, when you have gotten a reward before, then you have a neural pathway that expects a reward. And that neural pathway turns on the reward chemical in advance. And the good feeling is what gets you to do it.
Uh-huh.
And that's also what gets like a heroin addict to go
Mm-hmm.
out and rob a house to get money to buy more heroin. It's
Mm-hmm.
the anticipation of reward.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a situation where either it's unfamiliar or you failed to get the reward in the past, the famous example of that is once a student does poorly on a test. Now, the thought of test triggers a bad chemical. So instead of studying, they fear studying and then
Mm-hmm.
they do worse.
Yeah. I have been lucky enough to be pretty good academically. So even now as an adult, I have to do certifications and studying. I Because I have gotten rewards, recognition from teachers when I was growing up, I don't fear studying, and I'm still pretty good at like written tests. So that it it's interesting to hear you put the explanation on it, because that explains why I'm so nerdy. I don't mind studying. I like homework
Yes,
completed.
yes, me too. Yes, I know what
Hmm.
you mean. But well, then we'll use a different example. If you give a PowerPoint presentation in a
Hmm.
work context, and let's say that in your perception, the stakes are very high because you, again, are anticipating the fabulous dopamine that you're going to get if you
Yeah.
reach this goal.
Uh-huh.
And so let's say you get negative feedback on that presentation. And let's say that 9 people loved it, but one person made this little comment. And then
Mm-hmm.
10 years from now, you're doing presentations, and that's the criticism you're still anticipating, even though it may not be relevant, and maybe
Hmm.
another person had another criticism. So we're all wired by whatever happened in our past.
Yeah. And I also want to hear from you. We are our biggest critics, right? And it's not necessarily because we have been criticized, but is there anything to do with our how our brain chemicals work that makes us so averse? Like we do not even want to appear bad, like physically or in a work setting. Yeah, can you tell us more?
Sure. Yeah. So, first, when we are born, our brains are not wired at all. Animals are wired at birth, but humans are not. So animals run with the herd a day after they're born, when humans take like a year to take one step and maybe 20 years to meet their own survival needs. So that wiring happens from your lived experience. And as adults, we may find it insulting if someone implies that we're running on our childhood wiring, but that's the physiological fact. The technical word for it is, well, it's not technical really, but the familiar word is white matter as opposed to
Mm,
gray matter. So the
mm,
white matter is the neural pathways that built big when you were young. And because they're so big, they're super efficient. So the sort of cliche about riding a bicycle, but it's
mhm.
not just your muscles. It's like your native language is wired when you're young,
Yeah, yeah.
and your emotions are wired when you're. And if you try to learn a language later on, it's a lot of work. So it's the same with your emotions. So we default to those early emotions. So where did they come from? So I'll give you a few examples. So one is mirror neurons. So we are wired to not only our brain is not only wired by the rewards and pain that we experience ourselves, but the rewards and pain that we see other people get.
Mm,
So if you see someone in your social group and everyone says, "Oh, they're terrific," you want to be like them. If you
yeah.
see someone in your social group always getting in trouble, you think, oh, I better not do that.
Hmm.
So that's a big part of our early childhood wiring. And then in adolescence, we have another spurt of this chemical that creates the big white matter. The chemical is called myelin. It's like the road building material of the brain.
Hmm.
So our adolescent experience, our adolescent rewards and threats are also a big part of our wiring. So your wiring was around self-criticism and mine too. But mine was in a different way from yours, perhaps, because mine came with this message and yours came with that message.
Yeah.
But a person may grow up with the opposite message.
Hmm.
Rather than self-criticism or self-restraint, they think it's everybody else's fault. If I don't get what I want immediately, I'm going to scream. And then if screaming has bad consequences, it's your fault for how dare you be mean to me? How dare you put
Mm,
me in
yeah.
jail? And if I take a drug that almost kills me, it's your fault for selling the drug or not
Uh-huh.
warning me about the drug or
Mm,
whatever happens, it's always someone else's fault. So that's
mhm.
a really deep kind of wiring that many people get. So imagine like we're all interacting in a world with different wiring.
Yeah. And it explains how we, you can see, you can guess how someone was brought up to just by their behavior. I'm also very fascinated by how different personalities are depending on like if you're the only child versus the eldest versus the youngest. And this completely explains it because how they were treated when they were growing up shapes how they think the world operates.
Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. And unfortunately, academic psychology and the whole wellness world and the therapy world,
Hmm.
they don't talk about this very much. The simple reason is that studying genetics is safe, career-wise, whereas it's very hard to study early experience.
Yeah.
Uh, for so many reasons. So it just doesn't get talked about.
Hmm.
But the way I learned about it, and I invite everyone to do this, if you read the biographies, I love to read biography, and I look for biographies that have information about the person's childhood.
Hmm.
And don't just read modern biography, because a modern biography may have this sort of poor me attitude toward their childhood, where,
Yeah.
um, you're only going to get a very narrow slice. And then, of course, in the past, biographies were limited because it was not polite to tell anything. But if you dig around, you find like amazing information, and you see that whatever happened in a person's later life, they were just reproducing their childhood. Every single person just reproduces their childhood. It's mind blowing. And
Hmm.
even though I see that in others, every day I have to ask myself, like, how am I reproducing my childhood? Because
Hmm.
it's hard to see in yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. So I am sure that every listener is above 25 years old based on the stats that I have access to. So I know you talked about how to train our brain to become happier. And if it's based on past experience, that's a lot of past experience that we have to try to tackle and
Exactly.
try to trick it. What are some simple steps that we all can take easy every day to
Thank you.
train?
Well, I agree with your word trick because this is really what it is.
Hmm.
So, my brain is already wired to like X and fear Y. And
Hmm.
so, the only way I can change it is to feed it something new and persuade myself that I like it.
Hmm.
But that's not going to just happen on a verbal level. So if you look at animal training classes and you see that a dog is trained to do something if you give it a dog biscuit,
Uh-huh.
and that works. Usually it takes a lot of repetition. It
Mm-hmm.
takes breaking the new task into small steps and then giving a small reward for every step. And
Mm-hmm.
I've participated in a few animal training classes, and it's mind-blowing, and I think everyone should do that. So in our daily lives, it's not always obvious how you can do that. Because what's more important is not just, diet and exercise that everybody talks about, but our thought habits. So if I have a thought habit, let's use the, common one of like, poor me, nothing good ever happens to me.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you train in something else? Well, if you say, I'm fabulous and everything good is going to happen to me, you're not going to really believe that. And your brain only releases dopamine if you actually see yourself getting closer. So the
Mm-hmm.
first thing is to have realistic goals and then take a tiny step toward the goal
Mm-hmm.
and then give yourself some immediate reward, like a dog biscuit, for taking that tiny step. And
Uh-huh.
by doing this continually, you will build a new pathway, and it will not be as big as the one you built in childhood, but you will build an exit ramp from the childhood pathway to catch yourself when
Mm-hmm.
you're on that highway to say, oh, there I am thinking, poor me, nothing good ever happens to me. What
Uh-huh.
other options do I have? And then you've built this other option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's you yourself, everyone. We are our own cure if you do want to make a change in life, but you do have to want to make that change first.
Yes, on the one hand, you have to want it and do it repeatedly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the way I explain in my book, if you do it for 45 days without stop,
Mm-hmm.
that's enough to build a new pathway. But it's not enough to like completely change everything in your life, but like focus on one pathway and then another.
Yeah. So it's completely threw it out the window when people just say, repeat to yourself, like, you are fabulous. So it doesn't really work from what I'm hearing.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some common myths that you have heard? So we've talked about how dopamine is negative. That's a myth. Anything else that you can think of?
Yeah. So the big one is serotonin. So, what have people already heard about serotonin? So, there's two things. One is, of course, that it's associated with antidepressants. And that is entirely from the pharmaceutical industry,
Mm,
which pitched that as a way to make you think that if you don't feel good all the time, that this pill can give it to you. And again, I have to be careful what I say, and if this is working for anyone, that's great. But the limits and the flawed research behind this view don't get enough attention. I wrote about it a bit in my new book, Why You're Unhappy: Biology versus Politics.
mm,
But the bottom line is that our serotonin is not meant to be on all the time, that it turns on when we have this one-up feeling. And it's so not politically correct to admit that you enjoy this one-up feeling.
mhm.
So I always use the example that if you're playing cards and you draw the card that you need, you're happy because you
Mhm.
think you're going to win.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a natural impulse to feel happy when you think you're going to win.
Mm,
And that's the feeling we're looking for, but we can't admit it. So people say, "Oh, I don't care about winning. I don't care about myself. I only want to save the world," because they think they're going to win if they say that, you
yeah.
know. So that's one whole thing. And then what I was talking about serotonin, these monkey studies were done in the 1980s, and they disappeared because the animal rights people attacked anyone doing monkey studies.
Mhm.
So all that information disappeared, and also because it's so politically incorrect. So now they don't have any other good explanation of serotonin. So people in the field of massage therapy did studies, and they concluded, guess what? Massage triggers serotonin. So
Mm,
now the information that's available on the internet, they say that the job of serotonin is to put you in a good mood, which is meaningless, doesn't mean anything. When you see a squirrel outside in the park, Do you think it survives by just sitting around being in a good mood? There is no chemical that just puts you in a good mood for no reason.
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah. We're not
Oh,
all.
one other thing. I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
Go
So
ahead.
in the animal world, they compete like crazy for mating opportunity.
Yeah,
And if you're at the bottom of the ladder, you don't get mating opportunity. So this is like the high school brain for everyone, that
yeah.
you don't get mating opportunity if you don't play the game, let's say.
Hmm.
And you're always hyper aware of other people who are playing it more successfully than you are. And
Hmm.
once again, there have been studies on this throughout the 20th century, but it all disappeared right when the internet came out. And yet I learned about it, I'm telling you, because since you live in London. So in France, there are a couple of zoos
Hmm.
where they talk about this in public. At least the last time I was there,
Hmm.
like they explain the reproductive hierarchy in each species of monkey.
I would love to check it out. Yeah, I'll ask you which one it is after the show. Because I was interested in psychology. I didn't pursue it, but I'm interested in it at a different level because I like drawing, I like connecting dots. So understanding how things work and seeing, oh, that's why that happened that way. It's fascinating. So for the last part of our podcast episode, I would like to ask you a few lightning round questions, just really quick. Don't
Okay,
really need to think about it a lot, and it
okay,
would just be a little bit of fun.
okay.
Something that triggers one of the
Mm.
happy chemicals. Okay. So, one thing people think will make them happy, but doesn't. What do you think?
Um, Moral superiority. So this is the way in the modern world, it's the safe way. If you're listening, I'm doing air quotes.
Yeah.
Um, so everybody thinks, well, I'm good because I believe X or I do Y. And because it's not nice to pull out your sword and get into fights with people or insult people, or it's even considered not nice to care about being more successful than someone else. So being morally superior, of course, also if you try to be more successful, you may fail. But if you're morally superior, you could say, well, I'm a better person than all of these evil billionaires. And that's sort of the thought loop that's popular in today's culture. And you hear it just endlessly, but it doesn't really make people happy. They still end up bitter and angry.
Mm, okay. What makes you feel safe and connected?
Oh, I um I like to watch a movie with my husband every night.
Mm.
And
Every night.
every night,
Wow.
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, for like 25 years. Yeah, of course, it's much easier to get a movie now than it was when we
Yeah.
started. We would have to go to the video store and get a video cassette,
Hmm.
and they had the new releases, and then they had the videos that you'd get for $1 if you got one of the new releases.
Hmm.
So for me, like you see, I grew up in a world where television was evil, but the bottom line is that we all need to unwind and do nothing.
Hmm.
But the minute you unwind and do nothing, your mind goes to a bad place. So, because those cortisol pathways are so well developed.
Hmm.
So we need to keep our mind busy. That's why it's a challenge to unwind.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's why so many people have bad addictions.
Hmm.
So watching a movie with my husband, and we sit in a, in a cuddly chair. And so it's a completely
Ah,
physical and mental discharging.
uh-huh.
And for people to know that this, discharging or whatever, the way it's a real physical thing is that let's say I'm worried about something and the electricity in my brain is flowing in that neural pathway.
Yeah.
So the electricity just tends to keep circulating where it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes something to overcome inertia to get your electricity out of that pathway into something else. So, what is the something else? It has to be another pathway that's already well developed.
Uh-huh.
And that's why people, when they need to rest, they often rest in unhealthy ways. And everyone needs to develop a healthy way to rest.
So I'm glad your past experience of, oh, getting a movie is difficult did not keep you from enjoying now every night a movie. Okay. A guilty pleasure that lights up your dopamine, even if you know better.
Well, my son bought me an ice cream maker. So I love
Ooh.
ice cream.
Uh-huh.
And so now I make my own ice cream and it's
Mm-hmm.
much healthier than store-bought ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard that it's hard to get out of a container. So I only
Mm-hmm.
have a little bit. So I found, I guess, a healthy way to have ice cream every day.
That's nice. Something you wish you could rewire in your own brain.
Yeah. So I have scoliosis, and that means that my spine is crooked. So I took yoga classes for 10 years
Mm-hmm.
and it did not really help me. But if it's helping anyone, hooray. But they trained me to take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a sort of a forced deep breath.
Yeah.
And so it's not really good for me, but like I don't know, it's become a wired in thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard to explain, but the bottom line is that we have two kinds of breath. One is automatic and
Mm-hmm.
the other is intentional.
Yeah.
And I've been indoctrinated to think that my automatic breath is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm over relying on this intentional breath, which is not good because most of our breath is supposed to be autonomic, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One more. One daily habit that's non-negotiable for you, your own mental health.
Okay. So first, I always do my writing first thing in the morning. Of course, I'm like formally retired, so I have my own schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I always do like the difficult creative stuff first
Mm-hmm.
before I do any administrative boring things because it's like to do something that takes your 100% focus, you have to, leave out everything else. And I love to drink tea, so I have a lot of tea all day. And
Mm-hmm.
then I live at the bottom of a steep hill, so I climb the hill every day.
Uh-huh. Nice. Yeah, I need to rewire my brain a little bit to help me tackle things that I've been postponing because it's difficult and I don't really see the reward. Maybe. And this is something that I've heard in other episodes as well. It's breaking goals into small chunks. So I'm gonna spend the rest of my night tonight figuring out how I can break this task in small chunks so I can actually finish it.
Great. Well, I should say that I do coaching with people for this. I don't do long-term coaching, but I do like one or two sessions
Hmm.
for a person that wants to zero in on what that new behavior that they want to repeat, the new circuit that they want to build. So I'd be happy to do it for you
Oh,
and
nice.
your listeners at special price even. Free to you.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, how can we connect with you?
So my website is innermammalinstitute.org,
Hmm.
innermammalinstitute.org. And at the bottom of every page, I have a form where you could put your email and get a free 5-day happy chemical jumpstart, which
Mm-hmm.
is one email a day for 5 days on each of 5 chemicals.
Okay. I would definitely write that in the show notes as well, so everyone can see a world that they didn't realize exists.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Loretta, for being on the show. I look forward to connecting with you more, doing more brain talk, because I'm also very interested in that. And thank you for your time.
Sure. Thank you for the great questions. It's terrific.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mind Blend. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to follow and share it with anyone who needs to hear it. And let's keep the conversation going. Connect with me on LinkedIn or leave me a comment. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and let's continue to plan our minds and discover what's possible.